The ship that docked at Conclave Meridian was unremarkable in every way that mattered, which was exactly the point. Priva Solen noticed the Envoy vessel before she noticed anything else. Not because it was impressive, because it wasn't. A mid-range diplomatic courier, civilian registry, no visible armament, hallmarkings that identified it as Earth Cultural Liaison, 7 and 3 galactic scripts, and one that was slightly smudged at the edge, as though whoever had stenciled it had pressed too hard. The Conclave's docking officials logged it in 11 seconds and moved on. 11 seconds, she had counted. Saren Mail was standing at the viewport when she found him. He was looking at the station, not at the stars, and his hands were in his pockets, and he was very still in the way that only people who have spent years learning to look like background noise ever manage to be still. In his right hand, Priva could see the faint outline of the pencil stub through the jacket fabric. He was gripping it, just enough. Not anxious, she had known him long enough to know the difference. Something else. "They've assigned us the subordinate tier," she said. "I know," Saren said. He didn't move. "It's a repurposed maintenance corridor. The ceiling is 4 feet off standard. The air recycler runs on a 12-second cycle, which means the smell changes." She paused. "There's a water reclamation junction 20 meters down the primary conduit from our assigned room." "I know that too," Saren said. She waited. "We're close to the station's primary data conduit intersection," he said, still looking at the viewport. "The subordinate tier runs directly above the junction housing. Whoever decided to insult us did us a significant favor." He turned from the viewport. His face was unremarkable in every dimension that made a face memorable. That was not an accident. "How long until we're expected on the deliberation floor?" 14 hours, Priva said. "Good." He reached into his jacket and produced the field notebook. It was small, worn, the cover dark with handling. He uncapped the charcoal pencil stub, 2 inches of it left, smooth on one side where his thumb had rested for years. The wood cracked faintly at the base, and pressed it to the first blank page. Around them, the docking arm clanged and hissed. Beyond the viewport, beings who had ruled the stars for centuries moved about their business and did not look at the 2 humans standing in a mid-range courier. They did not need to. They had already decided what they were. Saren wrote something careful. Priva did not ask what. "The part that is still being debated in every council chamber in the galaxy, that comes in a moment. Stay close." Conclave Meridian was shaped like a wheel 4 kilometers in diameter, anchored at the gravitational midpoint between 3 star systems because someone, 4 centuries ago, had decided that neutrality required a physical symbol. The air throughout the station carried a smell that Priva could only describe as 3 different atmospheres overlapping. Something faintly mineral, something organic and sweet, something that had no earthly comparison and registered in the back of the throat as absence rather than presence. The filtration systems had never been able to fully separate them. She had read about that in the briefing. Reading about it and breathing it were different things. The subordinate tier lived up to its name. Low ceilings, genuine, not metaphorical. The corridor's lighting ran at roughly 70% standard, which might have been an oversight or might not have been, and the water reclamation junction hummed through the wall at a frequency that Priva identified in approximately 4 minutes as 78 Hz, which put it just below the threshold of conscious irritation. Deliberate or incidental, she could not say. She mapped the corridor in both directions, noted the service access points, identified the 2 exits that were not the main entrance, and counted them again before she sat down. Her lips moved slightly when she counted. She had never been able to stop that. Saren unpacked nothing. He sat on the edge of the provided surface. It was not quite a chair, calibrated for a different body type, and opened his notebook and wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. Priva worked her own preparation in parallel, running the passive signal array through the cultural exchange materials, establishing the relay points, mapping the station's communication architecture in a scan that looked, to any intercepting system, like an Earth navigation system conducting routine positional calibration. In 6 hours, she would know the station's network the way she knew her own hands. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. She was, or rather she was beginning to understand she was, the only one who had needed the plan written down. 14 hours later, Priva followed Saren Mail onto the grand deliberation floor and understood immediately why the room had been designed to sound the way it did. Every surface curved toward the center. The ceiling arched at a height that made speakers' voices carry without amplification, which meant that everything said in this chamber had, for 4 centuries, arrived at every listener's ears at equal volume regardless of where the speaker stood. The effect was not acoustic democracy. It was acoustic inevitability. Words spoken here did not travel, they arrived, as though they had always been true. 12 environmental pods ringed the central floor in a crescent, each calibrated to the atmospheric requirements of its occupant species. The Thurvi Dominion's pod occupied the largest and most elevated position by tradition so old that no one living had been present when the tradition was established. In that pod, behind a transparasteel barrier that served no atmospheric function Priva could identify, the Thurvi breath standard mix, sat Archlegate Drun Vasek. She had read his file. Reading his file and seeing him were different things. Vasek stood 2.7 meters tall, which she had known. His skin was the color of iron that has just stopped glowing, which the file had described but not conveyed. 7 fingers on each hand, each tipped with a blunt ceremonial claw filed to precise gradations of rank. He wore a command sash bearing 23 sigils, each one a different material, a different color, the record of subordinated species laid across his chest like a catalog. He moved with the particular economy of a being who had not been hurried in 3 centuries and saw no reason to start. His left eye was a biomechanical replacement, amber-tinted, that caught light slightly differently than his right. It was still when he was still. When he was calculating, it flickered. It flickered when Saren walked in. Around the floor's perimeter, Priva catalogued the others. Delegate Scribe Orun of the Hesari Compact sat at his assigned station with a notation stylus moving at a speed that did not seem physically possible, his compound eyes fixed on his data surface. In 11 minutes of observation, he did not look up once. Senior Legate Tharvin Kosk of the Corvin Reaches sat with the posture of a being who had delivered the same fundamental speech to 17 different species, and saw no reason to vary it for the 18th. Station Warden Prane, a non-council observer species, present by tradition, technically neutral, stood at a position that Priva noted was exactly 3.4 meters from Vasek at all times. Not near him, not far from him. Exactly that distance. She filed that away, she did not know yet what it meant. Saren sat at the far end of the curved table, humanity's designated position, which was as far from the central dais as the chamber's geometry allowed. He set his portfolio down, produced his field notebook, pressed the charcoal pencil stub to a fresh page, and began to write something careful. The scratch of it was audible in the room's particular silence. Beings who had ruled the stars for centuries heard a human writing by hand and did not, quite, know whether to be amused or uneasy. Some of them chose amused. Priva heard Orun's stylus pause for half a second, then it resumed. Archlegate Vasek spoke. His voice arrived before she was ready for it, even though she had read about the subsonic register. It did not come in through her ears first. It came in through the back of her teeth, a vibration below the conscious auditory threshold, and only afterward resolved into words, slow, deliberate, in the common trade language that every species in the conclave used for formal sessions because it belonged to none of them. The conclave recognizes the arrival of representatives from the Sol system's third body, Vasek said. Designation, Earth. Classification, Presubordination, First Contact, Developmental Tier. You will be addressed according to that classification until formal proceedings determine otherwise. The rules Priva had learned in the briefing were absolute. New species appeared before the conclave as petitioners, not participants. Military credentials held no standing in diplomatic chambers. They were considered an embarrassment of category confusion. Any species without a confirmed conquest record had no standing to decline any formal conclave proposal. The conclave had never, in 4 centuries of operation, had a subordination proposal formally refused. Those were the 4 rules. They were not written down because writing them down would have implied they required defense. Vasek set a data slate on the central transfer surface and moved it, deliberately, towards Saren's end of the table. It traveled the full length of the curved surface on a mechanical guide rail, moving at a pace that suggested nothing about it was accidental. The preliminary terms of Earth's integration into the conclave's developmental oversight framework, Vasek said, have been prepared with considerable care. Solar system access restrictions during the assessment period, technology transfer protocols, inspection and compliance verification schedules. Given Earth's recent acquisition of interstellar travel capacity, 51 years by our records, these terms represent an unusually generous accommodation. Kosk of the Corvin Reaches added something in his measured rhythm. The framework has been applied to 6 species in the preceding century. Each found it productive. Priva already knew what productive meant. She had read those species files. She had read what productive looked like after 80 years. Saren picked up the data slate. He read it. Not quickly, not performing thoroughness. He read it the way someone reads a document they intend to remember in detail, which took 4 minutes and 11 seconds by Priva's count. The chamber held a specific quality of silence during those 4 minutes, not empty exactly, occupied. 12 species watching a human read by handheld light, and the only sound in the room the scratch of Saren's pencil moving across his notebook page in parallel. He was writing something as he read. Priva could not see what. He set the data slate down. He set it to his left, not in front of him, a small displacement, the kind that meant something to someone who noticed it. Thank you, Saren said. His voice, in the acoustic inevitability of the chamber, arrived at every listener simultaneously. I have read the terms. Vasek's amber lens held still. Your response, then. Per standard protocol, Earth may request a 48-hour consideration period before formal. No consideration period is necessary, Saren said. Every species has the right to arrive at its own terms. We're here to find yours and ours. Silence. Not the occupied silence from before. Something different. The quality of silence that follows when a room's operating assumptions have been touched and no one has yet determined how hard. Then from the Hesari pod, a sound that the translation matrix rendered as layered harmonic amusement. Then Kosk's measured exhalation, which served the same function. Then from 3 other pods simultaneously, variations on the same register, not hostile, amused. Thoroughly, completely, unself-consciously amused, in the way that certainty allows. Priva's lips moved. She counted the exits she had memorized. Main entrance, service corridor left, service corridor right. She found a 4th. She added it to the count. Saren did not react to the laughter. He looked down at his notebook. He wrote something. Across the room, Orun's stylus was moving faster than before. His compound eyes still had not left his data surface. But Priva had been recording the sound of his stylus for 11 minutes, and she noticed, because she noticed things like that the rhythm had changed. Not the speed, the rhythm. He was recording something different from what he had been recording before Saren spoke. She had 11 minutes of translation queued on his prior commentary. She pulled it up while the laughter continued. The translation read, Hesari formal register running assessment log, subject, Sol 3 representatives, preliminary notation, bilateral symmetry, limited sensory apparatus, ambulation rate suboptimal for threat classification, secondary notation. The shorter one is counting something with its mouth. Query, cultural or neurological. Priva closed the translation window. She would look at it again later. The laughter in the chamber found its own end. Vasek did not participate in it. He watched Saren the way his amber lens watched everything, with the particular quality of attention that calculated and filed and did not rush. Conclave will note, Vasek said, that Earth's representative has declined the consideration period and declined the standard petitioner's acknowledgement protocol. This is irregular. He paused. It was a specific pause calibrated. Irregular but not without precedent. 2 prior species declined the preliminary terms. Both were brought to compliance within a standard year. We note this not as threat. The conclave does not threaten developmental to your species, but as historical context. Historical context, Saren said. Yes, he reached into his portfolio. I have some of that as well. He produced a holographic projector, standard diplomatic hardware, the kind that could have held a presentation on Earth's cultural heritage, its geological history, its artistic traditions. The kind of projector that every first contact species brought, filled with the things they wanted the galaxy to see first. He set it on the table. He activated it. What appeared above the table was not Earth's cultural heritage. It was a timeline. Horizontal axis, 100 years. Vertical axis, active armed conflict zones mapped by geographic region of origin, color-coded by intensity. The result was a field of red marks so dense in certain periods that the individual marks became illegible. Not a map of wars, but a texture, a material, the way a fever chart becomes something other than a chart when the line never comes down. 14,000 red marks, 100 years. The timeline ran without interruption. In the past century, Saren said, human civilizations engaged in over 14,000 documented armed conflicts, simultaneously, continuously, without pause in our growth trajectory. He let the holographic display rotate slowly. Every species in this chamber has studied those records. We know you have. We gave you access to the archive 3 years before the session was scheduled. Most civilizations who study human warfare reach the conclusion you reached. Evidence of unfitness. Of developmental deficiency. Of a species that has not yet learned to stop. The chamber was quiet in a new way, still amused, mostly, but listening now rather than waiting for the joke to resolve. Saren looked up from his notebook. He had been writing the entire time. The pencil had not stopped. We study those 14,000 conflicts as our curriculum, he said. Every engagement documented, every tactic cataloged, every failure analyzed, every asymmetry identified and corrected. We did not fight 14,000 wars and emerge unchanged. We fought 14,000 wars and emerged very specifically shaped by every single one of them. Tharvan Kosk's head tilted. His measured rhythm broke fractionally. When he spoke, it was not the 17-species speech. The Sol System's conflict record, Kosk said slowly, was submitted as primary evidence for the developmental classification. A species that cannot maintain internal peace cannot be trusted to maintain. That framing, Saren said, assumes the purpose of those conflicts was failure to achieve peace. That's one reading. He closed his notebook. He did not put down the pencil. Another reading is that a species which has fought 14,000 wars against opponents who knew every tactic it knew has had the most rigorous military education in the accessible galaxy. Not against primitive opponents, not against species that did not fight back, against itself. The Hesari pod had gone quiet. Orun's stylus had slowed. Kosk said, that is a reframing, not a rebuttal. It's both, Saren said. You've studied our wars as evidence of our unfitness. We study them as our curriculum. Across the chamber, Priva watched Vasek. His amber lens had flickered twice during Saren's last 3 sentences. His hands were flat on the surface in front of him. Still. The particular stillness of something that has not decided yet what it is going to do. From the Hesari pod, Orun's stylus had stopped entirely. His compound eyes were still fixed on his data surface, but the stylus was still. Priva noted the time. She noted the exits again. She did not know yet that she was about to need a different count entirely. Vasek's amber lens flickered. Not slowly, a single sharp pulse, the way a lamp flickers when something draws current from the same line. His hands remained flat on the surface in front of him, but the deliberate economy of his stillness had changed quality. It was no longer the stillness of a being who had never been rushed. It was the stillness of a being deciding whether to move. Priva felt his voice before she heard it. The subsonic register sharpened, a vibration that climbed from the back of her teeth to the base of her skull, and she had to actively resist the impulse to stand. Not from respect, from something older and less reasoned than respect. The conclave, Vasek said, appreciates the Sol system's historical perspective. Each word arrived with the weight of something that had always been true. Curriculum, you say, a species that cannot prevent itself from destroying its own infrastructure on a 14,000 conflict scale has learned from that process. His amber lens held steady on Saren. Learned what precisely? How to fight anything, Saren said, including things that are significantly larger than us. The chamber held. Priva counted exits, main entrance, service corridor left. Service corridor right. The fourth she had found during Part 1's session opening, a maintenance access panel behind the Corvin Reach's environmental pod, 40 centimeters too narrow for Vasek's honor guard in full armor. She had measured it with her eyes. She was quite good at measuring things with her eyes. Kosk of the Corvin Reaches leaned forward. His measured rhythm returned, but its cadence had shifted. The speech he was about to deliver was not the 17th species version. The historical record of Sol system conflicts demonstrates a civilization incapable of coordinating its own internal factions. The Conclave's developmental framework exists precisely for species at this stage. It is not restriction, it is scaffolding. Scaffolding, Saren said. He wrote the word in his notebook. He did not say anything else about it. That silence did more work than a rebuttal would have. Across the chamber, Orun's stylus had resumed, but at a different rhythm than before, still fast, still without looking up, but Priva caught the pattern shift again. He was not annotating the session anymore. He was annotating something else. She cued a secondary translation pull and let it run. Saren reached into his portfolio. He did it the way someone reaches for something they have had ready for a long time, unhurried, certain, the hand going directly to the thing without searching. He produced a thin folder, not a data slate, a physical folder which was, in this chamber, as irregular as writing by hand. He set it on the table. He adjusted the portfolio 2 inches to the left, straightened one sleeve, set his notebook to the right of the folder, pencil resting across its cover. These actions occupied approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked up. Humanity does not send its politicians to meet unknown civilizations, Saren said. He opened the folder. We send the ones who survived learning to fight the most dangerous opponents in the accessible galaxy. He looked at the first page, which is us. He began to read from the operational record. Not his, both of theirs. His own entry ran to 3 continental campaigns, 31 covert operations, 44 confirmed engagements across 6 theaters. He read the summary line. He did not editorialize. Priva's entry followed: Intelligence Logistics Officer, 2 prior first contact assessments, 30 confirmed engagements in human-on-human operational theaters. He read that summary line as well. Between the 2 individuals the Conclave classified as a low-priority diplomatic attaché and a logistics officer, Saren said, there are 74 confirmed combat engagements against human opponents, not ceremonially, functionally, against people who knew every approach, every tactic, every contingency we knew because they were us. He closed the folder. Every human sent to first contact situations holds veteran status. That is not a policy, that is a category. The Hesari pod produced a sound Priva had not heard from it before, not the layered harmonic amusement from earlier. Something flatter and shorter, the harmonic equivalent of a door closing. Kosk stopped moving entirely. Vasek's amber lens did not flicker. It held on Saren with a quality of attention that Priva recognized after a moment as recalculation. Not of the session, of something larger. She had seen that expression on human faces before in after-action reviews when the initial intelligence assessment had been wrong in a direction that mattered. 74 engagements, Vasek said, not a question, a measurement. Documented, Saren said, the full record is appended. Station Warden Prane had moved. Priva noticed it in her peripheral vision, not a dramatic repositioning, just a quarter-step adjustment, the kind of movement that someone makes when they are preparing to move further and have not decided yet whether to. His precise 3.4-meter distance from Vasek had shortened to 3.1. She noted the change. Vasek set both hands flat on the surface, a deliberate gesture, the kind that preceded formal declarations in Envoy protocol. She had read that in the briefing and said, "The conclave will take a 30-minute recess too." "There's no need," Saren said. Vasek's hands stayed flat. His amber lens did not flicker this time. It went very still. "We haven't finished," Saren said. The 30-minute recess had been, Priva understood, a retreat. An opportunity to confer, to recalibrate, to receive instructions from the Dominion command channel. Saren had just declined it on Vasek's behalf, which was either the most audacious thing she had ever seen in a diplomatic chamber or was so precisely calculated that it only appeared audacious. She had been working with him across 2 prior operations. She was still deciding which one. "The Conclave's honor guard," Vasek said, and his voice had dropped into a register below the subsonic, not threatening technically. The Envoy protocol distinction between coercive deployment and threatening deployment was documented, and the Conclave observed it formally. "Will escort the Sol system representatives to a comfortable waiting area while the senior delegates." 2 of the honor guard moved. Priva had read about Envoy honor guard, augmented, sealed environmental armor, energy discharge sidearms trained for suppression of non-compliant delegations. Each one nearly 2 meters, built wide, armor joints sealed at the standard junctions. She had read about the standard junctions in a different file. A file compiled from species who had documented close-quarters encounters with Envoy forces. There were not many such species. There were enough. Saren stood. 4 seconds, or rather, she would not be able to reconstruct the exact sequence afterward, only the result. 2 honor guard on the floor, armor intact, not a single joint breached, and Saren standing with his jacket slightly displaced at the left shoulder, which he corrected with one hand while the honor guard breathed on the floor and found that they were, surprisingly, uninjured. He sat back down. The chamber did not make a sound. Priva opened her case, 2 latches, sequential 2 clean clicks in the silence. She reached in and activated the relay array without looking at it, because she had done this in the dark in worse conditions than this. "Protocol Meridian is running," she said quietly. Across the chamber, 12 civilizations held very still. Saren looked at Vasek. Vasek was looking at the 2 honor guard on the floor. His 7-fingered hands, each tipped with ceremonial claws, had not moved from the flat position on the surface. He was, Priva thought, genuinely working out what had just occurred, not tactically, categorically. "Protocol Meridian," Saren said, "is the communications override relay we installed in the station's primary data conduit intersection, the one below the subordinate tier." He picked up his notebook. He did not open it. "We had 14 hours before this session. The tier is positioned directly above the junction housing." He looked at Vasek. "We thought you should know, given what happens next." Priva pulled the trigger on the relay. The main display above the central dais, the one that had been running standard session documentation, fractured. The session record disappeared. What replaced it was the station's secured data architecture, fleet position logs, classified council session transcripts, military deployment calendars for 6 of the 12 conclave species, communication routing trees that had been designated eyes, only at the highest conclave classification. All of it scrolling. All of it already transmitted. "In the first 6 hours after docking," Priva said, "I mapped and tapped the station's communication architecture. Everything the conclave discussed in closed session since our arrival has been recorded, translated, and transmitted to Earth Command." She had prepared the sentence in advance. She delivered it in the same register she used for logistics briefings. "You really should review your network architecture. It has some gaps." Vasek reached for his communicator. It returned static. He looked at it. He set it down. He looked at his hands, 7 fingers, ceremonial claws filed to rank, the hands of a being who had commanded the subordination of dozens of species and had never once received a response that was not compliance or silence. He looked at them for a moment, just a moment. Orun's stylus had stopped. It was the first time in the entire session that Orun had stopped. The stylus hovered above his data surface, and his compound eyes, which had not left that surface since the session began, had lifted. He was looking at Saren. His expression was not readable by any emotional framework Priva had access to, but the stylus was hovering. That was enough. Kosk had turned slightly away from the central dais, not toward an exit, away from the display. Priva had seen that gesture before in human debriefs when someone was managing the distance between themselves and information they needed time to process. Vasek attempted the communicator again. Static. He set it down more carefully the second time. You should know, Saren said, that the communication disruption is temporary. 40 minutes, we don't need 40 minutes. He paused. We needed the session which we've had. He looked down at his field notebook. He opened it to the first page, the page he had pressed the charcoal pencil to in the docking bay 14 hours ago while the station moved around him and beings who ruled the stars logged his ship in 11 seconds and moved on. He read what was written there. Priva could not see it from her angle. He read it carefully. Then he looked up at Archlegate Drune Vasek, across the full length of the curved table, across the two halves of a session that had begun with laughter and arrived somewhere that did not have a name yet. The chamber was not loud when it went quiet. It simply stopped. 12 species, centuries of combined history, a galactic order that had operated for 400 years without a single subordination proposal refused, and two humans standing in the middle of it, both of them breathing at a normal rate. Saren looked at Vasek. Vasek looked at Saren. The amber lens was still. Saren reached into his jacket. The pencil stub, 2 inches of it, smooth on one side, cracked at the base, worn to the shape of one specific hand over years of notebooks and field operations and waiting rooms, and one particular operation that the Wood remembered even if Saren had never named it aloud. He held it between both hands. He snapped it. The sound was small, dry. In a room that had gone completely quiet, it carried the way sounds carry when there is nothing else, when a room has stopped producing noise of its own and everything that remains is what one person chose to make. A single clean crack, and then silence returned, and the silence was different from the silence before it. He set both halves on the table in front of Archlegate Vasek, and offering a punctuation mark, a door closing. I believe that concludes the preliminary session, Saren said. His voice carried the acoustic inevitability of the chamber, and it arrived at every listener simultaneously, in the register of a man reading a weather report. We will be available for revised proposals beginning tomorrow morning. He picked up his portfolio. He stood. He walked toward the chamber exit, and Priva fell into step behind him, and she did not look back, because she had learned from watching Saren that looking back at a thing you have just done confirms that you are not certain of it, and Saren was always certain, and she was learning. She almost did not catch it. At the edge of her peripheral vision as the chamber doors opened, Station Warden Prane, he had moved again, not away from Vasek this time, toward him, closer than 3.4 meters. Closer than 3.1, standing at a position that placed him between Vasek and the nearest communication terminal, with the particular quality of attention of someone who has decided something and is waiting for the right moment to act on it. She filed it, she did not mention it. The doors closed behind them. Conclave Meridian entered emergency session before their shuttle had cleared the docking ring. Priva knew this because she was still receiving the station's communication feeds, which the relay continued to carry until the 40-minute disruption window expired. She listened to the first 11 minutes of emergency session through a translation matrix on her handheld unit. She stopped listening at minute 11, not because it became uninteresting, but because she needed to think about something else for a while. Vasek's formal communique to Thurvi Dominion Command was classified at the highest tier. Priva had already copied the routing architecture. The message, in full translation, read, recalibrate all first contact threat assessments. Classification, all species. Priority, immediate. That was all, no elaboration, no context. 23 conquest sigils on a command sash, 3 centuries of unchallenged precedent, and the message to his entire civilization was 9 words. She sat with that for a moment. 14 separate intelligence operations. She tracked 6 of them directly through the relay before the window expired, began pulling everything accessible on human military history within 90 minutes of the session's end. What they found, she knew, would not calm them. The archive was comprehensive. They had been given access to it 3 years ago at Earth Command's direction, specifically so they would have time to reach exactly the conclusion they had reached. The one Saren had let them carry into the room. The Hesari Compact's running commentary when the full translation resolved turned out to be something she had not expected. Not assessment, not analysis. It was a recitation, a formal register she had not initially identified because she did not have the Hesari liturgical database loaded. The translation flagged it on second pass, a war prayer, old form, pre-spaceflight according to the linguistic dating. Directed at themselves. Not against humanity, for themselves. A request for clarity of purpose in the presence of something they had not adequately prepared for. She read the translation twice. She noted that its cadence in the original Hesari phonemic structure contained 74 syllable units. She did not say this to Saren. She was not certain yet whether it was coincidence or whether the Hesari delegate had done something extraordinarily precise in the space of a single session. The human diplomatic section was relocated to the station's central tier within 72 hours. 3 species requested bilateral communications before the week was out. The Corvin Reaches submitted a formal inquiry about human historical documentation methodology, which was, in the context, either an academic request or the most diplomatic possible way of saying they needed to revise something significant. Priva chose to read it as both. The subordination proposal had been replaced by the end of the week with a mutual expansion framework, humanity invited into a coordinating role in galactic security architecture, which was the sentence that Priva read 4 times before she trusted the translation. Saren read it once. "We did not come here to join their civilization," he said, on the morning they prepared to return. They were in the central tier quarters, which had a ceiling at standard height and an atmospheric mix that smelled almost like nothing in particular. "We came to make sure they understood what joining ours would actually mean for them." Priva considered this. "Was any of it real?" she asked, the calm. He looked out through the viewport. The 3-star system's conclave meridian was anchored between were visible as separate color temperatures against the dark, one yellow-white, one blue-shifted, one so distant it registered as orange at the edge of resolution. He looked at them for a moment, just a moment. "All of it," he said. "That's what scared them." She thought about the honor guard on the floor, armor intact, not a joint breached. She thought about the notebook, open to the first page, the thing he had read before he looked up at Vasek. She thought about the fact that she had worked with Saren Mail across 2 prior operations and had never once seen what he wrote in the field notebook, not on any page, not even when she had reason to look. She did not ask. Some things were not about trust. Some things were about the particular discipline of knowing which questions changed the shape of what you were allowed to know. On the deliberation floor, which Priva confirmed through the relay's residual access before it expired, the 2 halves of the charcoal pencil stub were still on the table. No one had moved them. The emergency session had run for 19 hours around that table, 19 hours of recalibration and reassessment, and the particular institutional labor of revising certainties that had not been questioned in 4 centuries, and the 2 halves of a 2-inch charcoal pencil sat at Vasek's end of the curved surface throughout, and nobody touched them. She did not know whether that was reverence or fear or something the conclave species had no single word for. She suspected it was all 3, and she suspected that Saren had known it would be, which was why the offering had been made. Their shuttle undocked in the early station cycle, while most of the Meridian's population was still in the administrative recalibration that had occupied every corridor for days. The docking arm released with the same clang and hiss as arrival. The courier vessel moved away from the station through standard departure channels, logged by the Conclave's docking officials in 11 seconds. Priva sat at the forward viewport and watched the station diminish. Conclave Meridian turned slowly on its axis, a wheel of light against the dark, anchored at the gravitational midpoint of 3 systems because someone had decided 4 centuries ago that neutrality required a physical symbol. It looked the same as it had on approach. Same geometry, same light distribution. Same position between the same 3 stars. The corridors she had walked through on departure had looked the same as the corridors she had arrived in. Same ceiling height now, same lighting now. The atmospheric mix in the central tier carried a ghost of the 3 overlap smell that had been present throughout, mineral, organic, something without an earthly comparison, fainter here, but present, the station's identity bleeding through its own filtration. She watched until the station's individual lights blurred together and it became a single point. Then it became the same size as the 3 stars it sat between. Then it was just stars.